So the German plan of attack, which had been planned for some time, there was a German high-level officer named Alfred von Schlieffen, who was kind of a strange man. He was very introverted and obsessed with his job and only his job. His wife had died at a relatively young age, and that, I suppose, made him just focus on work. And he thought obsessively about planning for a European general war. The plan he came up with ended up being called the Schlieffen Plan, and it made a couple assumptions. One was that if there was a general European war, France and Russia would be involved, and so Germany would be fighting on two fronts. Schlieffen was convinced that Germany could not possibly win a battle or a war that was going on both sides of its country. So his plan was to take out one of the belligerents as quickly as possible and then focus on the other. Russia has more people, had a bigger manpower base than France did, and so Schlieffen's plan focused on attacking France really quickly. And the secret to defeating it quickly would be going through Belgium. She knew Belgium would declare neutrality in any kind of war, and which they did in 1914 when Germany declared war, or they tried to. Germany gave Belgium an ultimatum, kind of like Austria had given Serbia, and Belgium refused, and then they went to war, and then that was that. So Germany violated Belgian neutrality, and that was what got Britain into the war. And the Schlieffen's argument was that didn't matter, that if Germany didn't attack Belgium, France would come through Belgium to attack Germany anyway and use its resources against Germany. And so for Schlieffen, it was, who's ever going to get here first? Schlieffen's plan was to go straight through Belgium. He thought Belgium would fall quickly, and then you use the biggest possible armies on the right flank closest to the sea to envelop Paris and destroy the French armies and capture the French capital, Paris. And that was basically the plan that Germany went in with. It would involve using 80 to 90% of Germany's forces, or a huge percentage, on the Western Front first, thinking that it would take about 6 weeks, 6 to 8, for Russia to mobilize. Russia had a weaker communication system, not as good railroads, and so the thinking was you didn't have to worry about Russia for a while. So that was the plan Germany went forward with. The thinking was, this would be quick like the Franco-Prussian War was, and Germany would pretty much destroy the French armies and force it to surrender, and then it would focus on Russia, which would be the longer, more drawn-out battle that Germany would have to focus its resources on. Had this worked, the war might have been over pretty quickly, but they didn't quite plan the way the technology was going to affect things. So things didn't go to plan pretty early on. When Germany declared war on Belgium, it attacked Belgium. Then Britain declared war on Germany, and France had already declared war a few days earlier. So the plan went into motion in early August, and the first part of the plan, in the very first few days, went okay, but for Germany, but then it didn't. So the Belgians put up a much stiffer resistance than the German planners expected. So a good number of Germany's troops were tied up trying to defeat the various Belgian defensive points. There were a number of forts throughout Belgium that had been set up to protect it, and those fortresses might have worked in the 19th century, but they didn't work that well against the modern artillery that Germany had. They had very effective artillery, much bigger guns, howitzers, than the fortresses had ever been designed to withstand. And so while the fortresses didn't hold up for long, they held up longer than Germany expected, though, because of the tenacity of the soldiers trying to defend their homeland. And so the Germans got caught up in Antwerp in particular. This was a very important city that the Germans needed to capture, and it took them weeks to defeat the fortress there. And the Belgians were led by their king, King Albert, who became kind of a hero around the world for trying his best to lead his troops personally. And so this image shows where the Schlieffen Plan was supposed to, how the Schlieffen Plan was supposed to go, and then the line that shows that it didn't go the way it was planned. Essentially, it took longer to get through here because the Belgians fought harder than expected, and then also the German commander Schlieffen was dead. He had died in 1913. And when he died, he is rumored to have said right before he died, "Keep the right flank strong." Whether or not he said that when he died, we're not really sure, but it's kind of something he might have said, given that he was obsessed with this planning in his later life. But his successor as German Chief of Staff, Helmut von Moltke, he weakened various parts of the German armies and made them smaller, largely out of necessity because Belgium was fighting harder, and then there were more troops needed in the east earlier than expected, and Germany just couldn't mobilize quite quickly enough, and the mobilization process did take time, and Germany mobilized a lot, but not quite as many divisions as Schlieffen had wanted. It was about 20% less, 20-30%. Fewer troops overall than Schlieffen had advised to defeat France quickly. The French also had a plan in motion called Plan 17, which worked relatively well to keep the Germans from capturing the Verdun area, but the French plan didn't really work as it was intended to invade Germany, because they had to redeploy those troops really quickly to try to save Paris. So the Schlieffen Plan kind of went about 60% according to plan. Belgium slowed it down. The British were helping the Belgians by August and September, and so they were slowing the Germans down. And then the French counterattacked in order to save Paris when the German armies did start approaching it. And the German armies were unprepared for the counterattacks. And so the major battle that essentially saved France from losing the war was called the First Battle of the Marne, and took place about 30 miles outside Paris. And it took everything France had, but they did start pushing the German armies back and sent them into a retreat. And it was called the Great Retreat. And that pushed the Germans back over the next month into this line that was further north and east in France. And at the same time, during September, October, Antwerp was still holding out a little bit, and so some troops were diverted here. And then also what slowed the Germans down was that the Belgians opened up the floodgates, literally. They opened up their canals and flooded a lot of the low-lying plains country that exists in Belgium. And so it was just literally a slog that the German armies couldn't move quickly enough to bring as many troops to bear as they needed. So because of that, Germans lost at the Marne, were pushed back, went into retreat. And then what happened over the next month and a half was called a race to the sea. It started in September after the Marne battle, and then what the Germans were trying to do was still get that right flank around the French armies to come back and envelop Paris, like take these ports where Britain was sending troops to help out the French and Belgians, and envelop the French armies. So that was the goal. But the French armies were able to stop them with every try. And then the French were also trying with their main goal. Remember, the cult of offensive was in full force, and so what the French were doing was just constantly attacking in order to try to expel the German armies from France. And the French commanders, Joseph Joffre and Ferdinand Foch, they all had this obsession with attacking. And so the Battle of the Marne and then the Race to the Sea, they were extremely casualty intensive engagements because the French just attacked. And this put the Germans into the defensive and kind of set the stage for the rest of the war on the Western Front, in where the Germans were really in a defensive stance after the Battle of the Marne and continuing until the end of the war, pretty much. As far as the Germans were concerned, they had captured Belgium, and they were also holding a pretty decent slice of France in the northeast, and so in the Champagne region and Meuse region. So the German approach became, we're going to hold what we've got. And the French approach became, we're going to do anything we can to expel them from our soil. And so after the Marne, in which the Germans lost a ton of troops, the French then lost just insane amount of troops in the ensuing first months of the war. It was in the Eastern Front where Germany had more success. Russia actually mobilized a lot quicker than was expected by Schlieffen, and they ended up attacking Germany and trying to take parts of what's now Poland, what was then Eastern Prussia. And the Russian goal was to take the port of Königsberg here, and the Germans mobilized to try to defend it, and succeeded overwhelmingly in defeating a much larger Russian army in what was called the Battle of Tannenberg. It was early in the war, and such an embarrassing defeat. Russia was proud of itself at first for having mobilized pretty quickly and was planning to get this port city that it had been wanting for some time. And instead, these smaller German armies, led by Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, which this one battle pretty much created the myth of their greatness for the rest of the war, and then going on later, they became German heroes. They were able to split up and then envelop the Russian forces and just capture a huge amount of them. The defeat was so embarrassing that the Russian commander killed himself. So in the East, things went well for Russia, or for Germany, and the East was where the kind of battles of movement actually happened. But this is where you really start to see the old Russian Empire start to falter. I'm going to have a video clip on this that you can watch.